Okay, in this unit we're going to talk about Flahsh, which is a multimedia application that does things that are slightly more complicated than websites. Now, the only thing I'm going to say about this at this point, if you're making multimedia for a website and you're using HTML, basically you're making separate images that are incorporated into the HTML using some kind of JavaScript or some script like that. Flahsh is a self-contained application, meaning that when you create a Flahsh object, it has all the graphics and the encoding inside it, which is slightly more useful if you're doing things like advertising banners and stuff like that. And those all can use three-dimensional graphics as part of their applications. And so that's what we're going to look at now. Okay, so you might remember this scene from a previous exercise. Basically, to recap it, all we did was to create a simple lamp based on objects that are moving parts, and we parented them together in such a way that they can be moved independently but also as a unit. So for example, if I selected the lamp shade and went to modify rotate, I could rotate that and it would take the lamp with it. Likewise, if I chose the top arm there, I could rotate it like so, and this one would rotate the whole thing. So the idea is we're going to make a simple animation involving the desk lamp. So let's say that if we move the frame guide, the playhead, to the, say, about half a second, I want to have the lamp look up. So as you can see, I can have it, kind of do something like that. But I also want it to move forward. And, oh, wrong one. Like that. So then, as you see, if you move the playhead back, it will do that. And we can also make it look like it's searching for something. So, as you can see, the animation can take any number of turns. And we're just going to animate a few different instances like that. So then we may have it sort of tuck in a little bit, and we'll move it back. And let's say we make a few motions like that. Let's see, later on in the animation, we even move the whole thing back a little bit. Sort of have it search. Oh. Have it search itself to some degree. And let's say that that's basically it. So what we want to do is we want to export this as a series of still frames. So the way we would do that, if you go to render, first of all, let's look at the camera view. This is what the camera is actually going to see. So we're going to frame the camera in a little bit, not by much. And if you look at the render globals, you can see that the actual frame is very small, 640 by 480. That is smaller than standard definition television, but that's okay for multimedia. Multimedia can be any size or shape that we want it to be because it isn't dependent on specific technology. It will play somewhere within the frame of a screen, and it can be any size you want. So we're going to leave that alone because we actually want it to be small. And the output, we're going to save that as RGB frames, and we're going to put that in a folder which I'm just going to call lamp frames. And I'm just going to call that lamp. And we're going to make sure we save that as PNG32 so that we'll knock out that background, and then just hit F10. So as in previous exercises, we can see that this animation includes basically 120 frames that are 640 by 480, and that includes an animation. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Flash. Now Flash, like Dreamweaver, was once a Macromedia project, but now it belongs to Adobe, and it still has some uses. There are many multimedia applications. A lot of web page design uses a lot of these, And so do cell phone applications, all kinds of little bitty apps that are created using programs like this. And so this particular program is not the easiest to use, and so we're not going to do all that much. We're just going to basically get a taste of what's possible. So first thing we're going to do is to make a new file, and I am going to stick with ActionScript 2. The reason why that's important is because ActionScript 2 is very close to JavaScript, and so if you have any JavaScript background, this will be a lot more familiar to you than the remake of ActionScript, which was really what made Flahsh less relevant. And the basic windows are going to be the same as you've seen anywhere else. We've got our main project window here. This is what the users are going to see. We have our timeline window, which displays the animation. We have our properties window, which talks about whatever it is we're selecting. And we have our project window, which shows all our assets. So let's go back to properties for a second and notice that the size of the main window is depicted here. And we're going to make that the same size as our animation. So I'm going to make that 640 by 480, and you'll see the window here changes to match that. And so that's going to be our main stage. That's what people are going to see. Now if you look down here in our timeline window, see we have only one layer, we'll talk about that in a minute, and basically nothing. So we're going to add frames to this timeline. It'll be like cell animation. So if I go to File, Import to Stage, and I'm going to take the first frame in the series, I'm going to hit OK or Open, and it says this appears to be part of a sequence. Do you want to import all of the images in the sequence? And yes, we do. And so you can see it takes us to the end of the timeline, which is at the 120th frame. And if we want to get a look at the earlier frames, we can scoot back here and see that they are all individual pictures. So this is our timeline, this is our lamp going crazy, individual pictures. So it's basically cell animation, and that's what we want. So this first layer here, I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call it Movie. That's the movie itself, but we're going to add more layers to this. Now the first thing I'll show you is how to view this. If you hold the Control key down and hit Enter, it will export a copy of this. And so you can see that this is what the thing looks like. It's going to play it over and over again in a loop. And this is interesting, but it is nowhere near complete, and it's certainly not interactive. So I'm just going to shut this off now. And if we go down here, I'm going to add a layer. And this layer is going to be the background. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to call this background. And I'm going to drag it below the movie file. So we're going to see the movie first, then the background. And I'm going to import a picture for the background image. I'm going to import to Stage. And this one will be, let's choose this background. And there it is. And I'm going to click on this and move it up into the right position. And so you see now our picture has a background. And if I hit Control Enter again, so there once again we have our lamp doing its thing, but now it has a background. And so what we want to do now is we want to give it some kind of control. Now the first thing we want to do is tell it not to play the animation automatically. So I'm going to make a new layer here, and this layer I'm going to call Script. And it doesn't actually matter where I put that layer, I'm just going to put it on the top, and I'm going to lock these other two layers because we don't want to put stuff into those accidentally. So for that first layer, on the very first frame, I'm going to put some code. Now if you look at the action window, you see an empty notepad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a simple line of code there. I'm going to write stop, and I have to put open parentheses, close parentheses, and a semicolon. All statements have to end with a semicolon. So now, if I hit Control Enter, it will not play the video. It will just show us this movie. and that's what we want it to do. So what we want to do first is to give it a button which will tell it to start. And so for that, we're going to go ahead and make a new object. If we go to the library, we can see that all of those frames are listed in the library. So what we're going to do now is we're going to insert a new symbol. Symbols are objects that have certain properties. And so this symbol is going to be called a button, and I'm going to call it button underscore all, because we're going to use this button for all of the things we're going to do in this model. And a button has a completely separate timeline. We have the scene, which we were just talking about, and we have the button. So a button's timeline only has 4 frames to it. And the first frame is called the up state. This is what the button looks like when you just get to it. So I'm going to import to its timeline one image. Import to stage. In this particular case, I'm going to choose between these 3. So let's say this will be the first state of the button. And these were labeled wrong, but that's okay. So the first state of the button is that. And so on the over state, this is where the button will be passed over as you pass the mouse over it. So I'm going to insert a new keyframe here. You're going to right click on this, insert keyframe, and I'm going to import to that one, to stage, the over state, which will be this one. And finally, the down state is when you click on it. I'm going to insert a keyframe there and import to stage that. And there it is. So then, if I go back to my scene, I go to the library, there's the button, button all, and I'm going to make a new layer here for the buttons. So this one will be called button, and I'm going to drag that. It doesn't actually matter where I put that, but I'm going to put that above the background. Actually, that should be above the movie. Okay, so there it is. So we got the buttons are on top of everything, the movie plays behind the buttons, and the background plays behind the movie. So right now, the button layer is the only one that's open. I'm going to drag the button into the movie, and there it is. So now it's a very big button, and fortunately it doesn't have to be. We can make that button as big or as small as we want. So I got my tools window open here. I'm going to go ahead and change the size of that button. So if I hold down the shift key, I can make that button a lot smaller. And if I go back to my tools and I hit my arrow again, now I can position that button. I'm going to put it right there. And so, right now, if I were to export that movie, I get this. Movie isn't playing, there's the button, it lights up, if I click it, turns red, but it doesn't do anything. So, what we're going to do is we're going to give it a chance to do something. So we're going to go back to our script layer, and notice there's only one line of code. And so I'm going to identify that button and tell the program what to do with it. So first of all, if I click on the button and I go to properties, you'll notice it doesn't have a name. The actual button is called button all, but this particular instance of the button is not named yet. So we're going to give it what's called an instance name. We're going to call it play underscore button. That particular, you can put as many buttons as you want, but that one's going to be called play underscore button. And if we go back to our timeline and click on the script, we're going to keep all the script in the same place, and I'm going to say play underscore button, which is what this is, dot on press, which is a command, equals function, open paren, close paren, and then I got to open the curly brace because there's some actions here, and if I hit the enter key, it will automatically close the brace, and all I'm going to say is play, open paren, close paren, and semicolon. And so let's see what that would do. So here again is our preview, and now when I click on the button, it works. So let's say that we're almost done here. We just want to add a couple more things. Now first of all, I want to add a label for the button. So let's say I make a new layer, which I would just call labels, and I'm going to put that label just above where the buttons are. And let's say on this part of the button I just want to create some text. So I go to my text tool, I create a little window, and I write play. You see, there it is. And let's say that that's enough. Let's say I'm just going to arrow that down so it's visible just above the button. And I can make that any font I want, but we'll just go with that right now. And let's say that I want to create a second button which will stop the animation if I don't feel like watching it. So if I go to the button layer, highlight that keyframe, I go back to the library, and I put the same button in there. And then I go and size that down just like I did the first one. And I move that down here. I call that one, go back to properties and give that another instance name. We'll call it button underscore stop. You see that's a little bit smaller than the other button. I could fix that. Why not? Let's make that a little bit bigger. I click on this. If I click on this, the little script where the little A is for action script, all I would have to do is basically take this code, copy it, put it in, change the name of that button, which would be button underscore stop, and I would just make that, instead of saying play, make it say stop. And that's it. And just for the heck of it, if I go back to my timeline, go into my labels layer, and if I were to put some text up there, I could say stop. I could move that down here. So there we go. So let's see what that looks like. So here we are again. Now we've got two buttons, and they react when we pass the mouse over them. If I hit play, there it goes. If I hit stop, it stops there. Play, it keeps on playing until it reaches the end and cycles back. And you can add more functionality if you want to. You could do all kinds of crazy things. But as you can see, this is an application for multimedia buttons made in 3D. So finally, if we were to save this file, because we haven't even saved it yet, probably a bad move, I'm just going to call this button under capital letter movie. That's going to be the name of the Flash file. And if you hit Control Enter, you'll export a copy of that that's named. So you can see, if you look at these in your files, there's a Flash file and a Swift file. Now the Swift file is almost 2 megabytes, which is pretty big for a Swift file, but you can see the Flash file is a whole lot bigger. That's 30 megabytes. But if you just activate the Swift file, just double click on it, and it runs relatively easily. It's self-contained, and there's your thing. And notice it will play within the screen, and that's basically it. So this example is simply to show you that it's possible to make multimedia applications using 3D graphics, and if someone was hiring you to do that, they'd handle all the script part of it. You would just provide the graphics. And of course, if you're already a script writer, this could be in a way that you can expand what you do.